When the Demon Queen's army first encircled my estate, I braced for the end. I was certain she'd finally come to slaughter the hero hiding inside my castle. But instead of storming the gates, her soldiers planted black banners along my wheat fields and completely ignored the fortress where Lucian was cowering. Then they delivered a single, bizarre message directly to my breakfast tray: Cedric Astor will move into Her Majesty's palace before sunset. I had spent 12 years preparing for an invasion, but not once did I imagine the invasion would revolve around my housing arrangements. My name is Cedric Astor, and in my old life I was a 28-year-old hotel manager who killed overnight shifts by reading fantasy novels. In this world, I was the disposable butler attached to the hero's household, a man whose sole contribution to the original story was dying in chapter 41 to buy the hero enough time to run. And that wasn't even the worst part. The woman commanding 30,000 demons outside my gates was Vera Noctis, the starving 7-year-old child I had secretly pulled from a slaughtered caravan years ago. According to the novel, she was destined to become the Demon Queen, invade humanity, murder the royal family, and personally kill both me and the hero before the final battle. Apparently, I had changed enough of the story that she still conquered half the continent, but now she wanted me to pack my socks and move in with her. I stood at the dining room window while armored demons waited beyond the hedges, their formation disciplined, silent, and irritatingly respectful of my vegetable garden. Not one soldier had stepped on my cabbages. Across the table, Lucian Arkwright, the actual hero of the novel, stared at the message with the expression of a man who had just discovered that prophecy had developed a personal grudge against him. "She cannot be serious," he said flatly. I pointed toward the largest siege tower, where demon soldiers were carrying wardrobes inside, and Lucian lowered the letter, stared for several seconds, then asked what exactly I had done to her. That question covered 12 years of mistakes. I had entered this world when Lucian and I were both 16. He was already training to become the Royal Academy's chosen swordsman, while I woke inside Cedric's body with a fever, a stack of household ledgers, and a perfect memory of every disaster the novel had planned. My goal had been simple: keep Lucian alive long enough to defeat Vera, avoid chapter 41, and retire somewhere quiet. But the novel made that difficult almost immediately. 3 weeks after my arrival, House Arkwright sent us north to inspect winter grain stores, and a blizzard closed the mountain road, forcing our carriage to stop near the ruins of a village that had been attacked by royal soldiers earlier that week. The official explanation was demon infiltration, but most of the bodies were human. Among the burned carts, I heard scratching beneath a broken wagon. Lucian wanted to check the nearby woods, so I stayed behind and lifted a splintered board. That was when I found Vera. She was small enough to fit beneath the wagon axle, covered in ash, barefoot in the snow, and clutching a kitchen knife with both hands. Her hair was black with a dark violet shine, her eyes were crimson, and 2 small horns curved through her tangled hair. I knew exactly who she was, the future Demon Queen. In the novel, soldiers found her 3 days later, killed the remaining demon refugees around her, and dragged her to a royal research prison, where she escaped at 15, and everything after that became history written in fire. I should have walked away. Instead, she collapsed while trying to stab me, and I caught her before her face hit the snow. That was mistake number 1. I carried her to an abandoned shepherd's hut before Lucian returned. And she woke long enough to bite my wrist, which seemed fair considering the circumstances. I offered her water, bread soaked in broth, and my wool coat, but she refused all 3 until I tasted the food first. The novel described Vera as cruel from childhood, but what I saw was a starving child who expected poison. I spent 2 hours convincing myself this didn't matter, and then she whispered one broken word: hungry. That ended the argument, so I fed her. Lucian found me before midnight. He looked at the horns, then at me, then at the demon child wearing my coat, and asked, "Cedric?" I answered, "Yes." He asked if I knew what she was, and I told him I did. "Why is she eating our supplies?" he asked, and I told him starvation was generally considered bad. Lucian rubbed both hands over his face, but the hero had always been annoyingly decent in the original story, and that saved Vera more than anything I said. He agreed not to call the soldiers. We hid her in the supply carriage, and the plan lasted 4 days. Vera recovered enough to become suspicious of every noise, uniform, and person except me. She followed me through inns in human disguise after I cut holes in a hood for her horns. She slept sitting against the door of whatever room I used, and if Lucian approached too quickly, she growled. Lucian took that personally. He complained that I had rescued her, but she still liked me better. And I told him he brought sword theory to a 7-year-old before breakfast, while I brought soup. He considered that an unfair comparison. We couldn't keep her inside House Arkwright because the estate employed hundreds of servants and hosted royal officers constantly. So I arranged papers through a traveling apothecary named Marixol, one of the few humans who secretly traded with demon communities. Merrick agreed to take Vera south, but she refused, not loudly, she simply held the sleeve of my coat and would not let go. Merrick waited while Lucian pretended not to watch, and I crouched in front of her and explained that soldiers would find her if she stayed, but if she went with Merrick, she might live. "I come back?" she asked, and the question hit harder than it should have. I didn't know what the altered future looked like, so I said, "If you survive long enough, maybe." That was not a promise, but Vera treated it like one. For 2 years, I heard nothing, and then packages started arriving. The first contained dried mountain flowers, the second a black feather from a shadow hawk, and the third a small dagger with a note written in terrible handwriting, "Cedric alive." I laughed when I read it, but Lucian didn't. He said she was tracking me, while I said she was sending gifts, and he pointed out that one gift was a knife. I told him some cultures were more practical than others. The packages continued, and her writing improved. The notes became longer, telling me she lived with a hidden demon village near the southern marsh, hated turnips, learned common speech, trained under a woman named General Sarkavel, and still remembered the shepherd's hut. She always ended letters the same way, "Wait for me." I never answered that line directly, but I did answer the letters. That was mistake number 2. I told her about Lucian's academy training, my work, the capital, food, and books, nothing political, nothing that could endanger her. When she was 11, she asked whether I planned to marry, and I wrote back that butlers generally needed wages before wives. The next package contained 3 gold coins, which I returned. She sent 6, and I returned those too. Then she sent a gemstone worth more than my annual salary. Lucian told me to keep it, but I told him to stop encouraging international corruption. The letters changed when Vera turned 13, less childish. More careful, she asked who visited me, which noble spoke to me, and whether House Arkwright planned to send me overseas. I assumed she was curious, but then Lord Pelham offered me a position managing his western estate with double the salary, and I accepted. The western estate burned down before I arrived. Nobody died, the fire started in an empty archive room, and demon ash was found on the roof. I didn't connect it to Vera at the time. The second opportunity came from Baron Essel, who needed an administrator in the eastern port, but 3 days after sending the offer, he withdrew it and apologized vaguely for changing regional circumstances. Years later, I learned Vera had sent him a map showing every demon tunnel beneath his city. No threat. Just the map, and he understood. By 16, Vera had united 5 hidden demon clans. By 17, 9, at 18, she killed General Morkant, the warlord who had sold demon children to royal laboratories. The surviving clans named her Queen of the Night Court, and the novel called that moment the beginning of the Demon War. But in my version, nothing happened, no invasion, no burned cities, no royal assassinations. Vera simply stopped writing for 3 months, and then one evening, a black carriage arrived outside House Arkwright. The woman who stepped out barely resembled the child I remembered. She was tall, pale, and dressed in black military silk beneath a long coat edged with silver, her horns grown into elegant dark curves behind her head. Her red eyes searched the courtyard once and found me immediately. I was carrying laundry records, very heroic. Vera walked past armed guards, ignored Lucian completely, and stopped 1 step away from me. For several seconds, she said nothing, and neither did I. Then she held out a paper bag. Inside were honey biscuits from the village bakery where I had bought her food 12 years earlier. "You remembered," I said, and her voice was low now, controlled everything that should have warned me. Lucian approached from behind, and Vera's eyes moved to him. The temperature in the courtyard seemed to drop. Lucian smiled awkwardly and said, "Good to see you, too," and Vera looked him over and replied, "You still live here?" He reminded her it was his house, and she glanced at me and answered, "Unfortunate." I changed the subject before diplomacy died in the courtyard. Vera had come officially to negotiate prisoner exchanges. But unofficially, she stayed for dinner and asked me 17 questions about my schedule. When I told her I planned to accompany Lucian to the capital because of a royal summons, she stopped eating and told me to decline. I said I couldn't. I was his butler, and her gaze moved toward Lucian as she said, "You can quit." Lucian choked on wine, and I told her that was not how employment worked. She answered, "Then your employment is poorly designed." I recognized the child who had once declared turnips a political problem, which made it easy to ignore the rest. Vera left the next morning, and 2 weeks later, King Aldrin issued a royal policy forbidding House Arkwright from assigning civilian staff to military expeditions. I thought Lucian had requested it, and he thought I had, but neither of us had. The policy was proposed by a southern duke whose border city had recently signed a peace arrangement with Vera, and that became pattern number 1. The next 4 years passed without full war. Human kingdoms called it a miracle, demon territories called it preparation, and I called it suspicious. Every city Vera spared signed some variation of the same clause. No marriage alliance or permanent appointment involving Cedric Astor without direct notification to the Night Court. I didn't learn that until much later. At the time, I only noticed that job offers disappeared. Lucian became famous. The novel's hero still accomplished heroic things. He killed a Hydra, stopped a cult, recovered the Sunblade, and saved Crown Princess Elaine during a siege. I managed his household, cleaned up political disasters, and avoided Chapter 41 so successfully that I began believing I had escaped the plot. Then Chapter 41 arrived 6 years late. The original scene took place at Harrow Pass. Lucian's army was retreating from demons, and Cedric stayed behind with 20 guards, and Vera killed him. But in my timeline, there was no demon army. Instead, royal commanders ordered Lucian into Harrow Pass to investigate missing scouts, and I went because I was responsible for supplies. We found the missing soldiers hanging from trees with human arrows in their backs, and Lucian immediately knew something was wrong. Then royal troops attacked us, not demons. Someone wanted the hero dead. Lucian fought toward the ridge while I stayed behind with the wagons, and a masked knight reached me. His sword went through my side. Pain erased the world. I remember falling, I remember snow, and then black fire. The masked knight screamed, someone lifted me, and I saw Vera above me through blurred vision. She had arrived before I died. The novel scene still happened, but the killer changed and the rescuer changed. Vera carried me through the battlefield while demons appeared from the trees around us. Lucian shouted my name, but she did not stop. She took me across the border. I woke 3 days later inside a black stone palace with my wounds stitched and my clothes gone, and my room had no lock. That detail seemed reassuring until I tried opening the door, and 2 demon guards bowed and told me Her Majesty ordered me to rest. I said I was rested, and they answered that Her Majesty had ordered more. When I asked how much, they looked at each other and said, indefinite. There it was. I found Vera in the throne room reading military reports, walked in wearing borrowed clothes in anger, and said, open the border. She didn't look surprised. She said I was injured, and I said I had noticed. She told me I should be in bed, and I snapped, you kidnapped me. She answered, I rescued you, and I reminded her she crossed into human territory with armed soldiers and brought me here unconscious. To protect you, she said, and I pointed toward the doors and demanded, let me leave. No, came the word immediately. That was the first time she stopped disguising possession as safety. I stared at her, and she met my eyes calmly, saying humans had tried to kill me. I replied that some humans had, but Lucian was human. He failed, she said, and I reminded her he was fighting 30 soldiers, but her expression barely changed. He still failed. The throne room went very quiet, and I asked how she knew about Harrow Pass. She answered, I watch threats. I asked whether she meant threats against her kingdom, and she said, against you. That was when I understood I had underestimated the scale. Vera maintained agents in every major human city, not primarily for war, but for me. My travel routes, employment offers, medical records, household changes, people who threatened me, hired me, or flirted with me. I asked that last category twice because I assumed I misheard, but I had not. You kept files on people who flirted with me? I said, and she answered, yes. I asked why, and she said, risk assessment. That is not military risk, I said, and she replied, it is to me. I laughed once, and Vera looked offended, so I stopped. You cannot imprison me because you are afraid, I said, and she answered, I can. I said she should not, and that answer took longer. I asked how long she planned to keep me, and her eyes softened until staying feels normal. That was honest enough to be terrifying. I stayed 3 weeks, not voluntarily. Vera gave me complete access to the palace except the gates. I could visit libraries, kitchens, gardens, council rooms, and training yards, and speak to anyone. I could send letters, all of which were copied, and she admitted that too. I wrote Lucian, and he replied that he was negotiating my release. Vera read the letter before handing it over and muttered, his handwriting irritates me. I told her Lucian's handwriting had always been bad, and she said, he writes your name too often. He is asking whether I am alive, I said, and she answered, he could ask once. I took the letter away, and she let me. That was the strange part. Vera was not cruel to me. She never threatened me directly, never touched me without permission, and never denied food, books, or company. She simply removed the concept of leaving. A beautiful cage is still a cage. And I began studying palace routines, guard shifts, gate mechanisms, teleportation wards, and carriage schedules. Vera noticed immediately and said, you are planning escape, and I said, yes. She asked whether I wanted help. And I stared at her. She almost smiled, and her confidence irritated me. I changed strategy. If I couldn't leave secretly, I would make staying politically expensive. I requested meetings with demon ministers, and Vera approved them. I reviewed grain shortages, approved repairs, reorganized palace kitchens, and reduced waste in cavalry feed. Within 10 days, half the court started treating me like an administrator, and Vera seemed delighted. That was not the result I wanted. "You are doing this on purpose," I said, and she asked what I meant. I accused her of making me useful there, and she said, "You did that yourself." Annoyingly true. I stopped improving things. And the palace immediately became less efficient. I lasted 1 day before fixing the kitchen inventory again. Old habits are humiliating. My first real opening came from General Sarkavel, the same woman who had trained Vera as a child. She found me in the armory office reviewing supply manifests I claimed not to care about, and closed the door behind her. "You need to return," she said, and I agreed. She looked relieved, and I thanked her. "She does not listen," Sarka added. And then she explained why Vera had become worse recently. Someone inside the human kingdoms had been deliberately provoking conflict. Border massacres blamed on demons. Demon villages attacked by soldiers wearing false royal insignias, trade caravans disappearing, peace treaties sabotaged. Every incident pushed both sides closer to war. Harrow Pass was part of it. If Lucian died, humans would blame Vera. If I died beside him, Vera would actually invade. Someone wanted both outcomes. Sarka had one name, High Chancellor Ormond, who controlled the Royal War Council. In the original novel, Vale was a minor political character who died during Vera's first invasion. I barely remembered him, and that made him dangerous. Major villains are easy to watch, background politicians survive by being boring. Sarka also told me something else. Lucian had publicly requested my release, but privately, his advisors proposed a different solution: use me as bait. My stomach tightened. They believed Vera's obsession made me the only reliable way to force her onto chosen ground, offer a prisoner exchange, place me at the center, ambush her with holy weapons, kill the demon queen and end the war before it began. Lucian had not approved the plan yet. I asked Sarka how she knew, and she said Vera's agents had stolen war council minutes. Of course. I confronted Vera that night, and she already knew. She said, "He will not use you," and I asked why she sounded so certain. "If he tries, I kill him," she said, and I said, "No." Her eyes sharpened. "Cedric," she said, but I repeated no. "He would sacrifice you," she said, and I reminded her that he had not. She said he considered it, and I pointed out that he sat on a council and had not made the decision. "He is the hero," she said, and I answered, "That does not make every suggestion his." Vera stood from the throne, and black fire curled along the steps. "You defend him too easily." "I have known him my entire adult life," I said, and she replied, "You knew me longer." That stopped me. Technically yes, I met Vera before Lucian became my friend in this body, and she remembered that. Of course she did. "This is not a competition," I said, and Vera's voice dropped. "It always becomes one." There was the wound beneath everything. Vera believed relationships were territorial because her childhood taught her that people disappeared whenever stronger forces claimed them. Royal soldiers claimed villages, hunters claimed children, warlords claimed clans, kings claimed borders. So she learned to claim first. I understood the mechanism, but that did not make it acceptable. I told her I would return to Lucian, and she said no. I told her I would stop helping her court if she kept the gates closed, and she said, "You already tried that." I told her I would try harder, and her mouth twitched, but she knew I was serious. "Open the gate," I said, and she refused. We had reached the same wall, so I created another door. General Sarka arranged a diplomatic convoy to the neutral city of Velis, and Vera had to attend. Human representatives would be there, and so would Lucian. I volunteered as palace administrator, and Vera knew exactly what I was doing. She allowed it anyway because refusing would prove my point too clearly. The trip took 4 days. She rode beside my carriage the entire time, and at night her tent was placed next to mine. I moved mine, and the next evening hers moved too. I stopped moving. Victory sometimes means conserving energy. Velis was built around an old lake and protected by laws older than both kingdoms. No army could enter beyond 500 soldiers, and no spell above third circle functioned inside the council district. Vera hated it. I loved it. Lucian arrived the second morning. He looked older than I remembered, more tired. He saw me across the council courtyard and walked straight past 3 diplomats. Vera stepped between us, and Lucian stopped. They stared at each other, and I stepped around Vera and hugged him. She looked betrayed. Lucian hugged back, then whispered, "I am going to die," and I told him probably not today. He said that was not reassuring. And Vera stood behind me. I could feel the jealousy without looking, so I ended the hug. Progress has limits. Lucian apologized immediately for Harrow Pass, for failing to reach me. and for allowing the War Council even to discuss using me. I asked whether he supported the bait plan, and he said no. I asked whether he ever would, and he hesitated. That hesitation mattered. Lucian, I said, and he finally said, if it prevented a continental war. I stepped back, and he stopped speaking. There it was, the hero's flaw. Lucian had spent his life being taught that sacrifice was noble, his, others, everyone's. If one death saved 10,000, the answer seemed obvious until you were the one being volunteered. Vera's voice behind me was very calm. I told you, she said, and I turned and said, this does not make you right. Her expression hardened, and I looked at Lucian, and it does not make him right either. Both powerful people looked equally irritated. Good. The peace talks began badly. Human delegates demanded demon withdrawal from 3 disputed valleys, demon delegates demanded reparations for burned villages, and Chancellor Vale blamed Vera for every missing caravan. Sarka produced proof of human mercenaries using demon arrows, and people shouted. I watched, and something felt rehearsed. Every accusation pushed toward one conclusion: war was inevitable. I asked for copies of incident maps, and nobody cared about the butler. That helped. By dinner, I had 27 maps spread across my room. Lucian joined me, and Vera arrived 5 minutes later without invitation, of course. We compared attack sites, first random, then I overlaid trade routes. And a pattern appeared. Every incident occurred near roads owned by one consortium, Vale Trading Company, the Chancellor's family business. Lucian swore, and Vera stopped breathing for 1 second. Vale profited from block trade, military contracts, and emergency grain pricing. War was not ideology, it was business, and that made more sense than prophecy. We needed evidence. Lucian suggested arresting Vale. Vera suggested tearing his mind apart, and I suggested accounting. They both looked disappointed. The consortium kept ledgers in Veles because neutral banking laws protected foreign assets, and I had spent 6 years managing noble accounts. If money moved, paperwork existed. We visited the banking house the next morning under diplomatic authority, but Vale had anticipated that records were clean, too clean, no unusual withdrawals, no mercenary payments, no illegal transfers. I stared at the ledgers for an hour, then noticed shipping insurance. Every caravan attacked had been insured through the same subsidiary. Vale's company collected compensation after each loss, then purchased replacement goods at inflated wartime prices, double profit. The claims included inspection signatures from one clerk, Thomas Elrin, but we found him dead in his apartment, officially suicide. The window was open, and a demon feather sat beside the body. Vera picked it up and immediately said, not ours, and I asked how she knew wrong mold pattern. Lucian stared, and I shrugged. She notices things, and Vera looked pleased. We searched the apartment, no ledger, confession, or useful document. Then I found flour beneath the bed, fresh, odd for a bank clerk who ate at taverns. A loose floorboard hid 3 sacks, and inside the third was a sealed book. Insurance records, real ones, names, payments, mercenary captains, royal officers, demon smugglers. Vale had bought violence from both sides. The final page listed a Harrow operation, Harrow Pass, objective hero compromised, assets C eliminated, demon retaliation guaranteed. Assets C, Cedric. Vera read it over my shoulder, and black fire appeared despite Velas's wards. That should not have been possible. Lucian stepped back and said, Vera, but she did not hear him. I took the book from her, and she looked at me. Do not kill him, I said, and her face went still. He ordered your death, she said. And I read the page. She said he turned me into an asset and wanted her to start a war over my body. That is exactly why you cannot give him one, I said, and her flames dimmed. Lucian looked at me, and I looked back. No bait, I said, and he nodded this time without hesitation. Good. We brought the ledger to the council, and Vale denied everything. Then one of his guards stabbed the Veles magistrate, and chaos followed. Vale ran, Lucian chased him, Vera chased Lucian, and I chased both because apparently being the only sensible person requires cardio. Vale escaped the council district and crossed the eastern bridge, where his private soldiers waited outside the city wards, more than 50, human and demon, proof in armor. Lucian drew the sun blade. And Vera summoned black fire. For 10 minutes, hero and demon queen fought on the same side, and it was disturbingly effective. Lucian cut through shields, Vera disabled cavalry, and I stayed behind a stone wall because I had achieved emotional growth. Then someone grabbed me. A mercenary captain with a knife at my throat, of course. Vale stopped on the far end of the bridge and called out, Queen, and Vera froze. Lucian did too. The captain dragged me forward, and Vale smiled. There are villains who enjoy speeches because nobody interrupts them enough. He explained his plan. War between humans and demons would destroy old trade restrictions. Vale would supply both sides, human nobles would remove Vera, demons would weaken the crown, and whoever survived would owe him. Then he looked at Vera and said, you made it easier than expected, you built peace treaties around one servant. I felt every delegate listening as Vale continued. Cities learned they could avoid your armies by promising not to employ him. I looked at Vera, and she did not deny it. Lucian looked at me, then at her, and said, "What?" Vale laughed. That was how I finally learned the full scale. Roston spared because its duke rejected my application. Galenport untouched after its council barred House Arkwright staff recruitment, Moral Valley protected after signing a clause preventing me from receiving land there, 7 cities, 3 fortresses, 2 noble houses. Vera had shaped military policy around keeping me reachable, and my stomach turned. "Is that true?" I asked, and she looked at me and said, "Yes." The knife at my throat suddenly felt secondary. "You threaten cities because they might hire me?" I said, and she said she spared them. "That is not the defense you think it is." Vale laughed harder, and the captain holding me relaxed. That was his mistake. I stamped his foot, dropped my weight, and drove my elbow backward. Hotel management did not teach combat, but angry customers had taught me leverage. The knife moved, Lucian crossed the distance first, and the captain fell. Vera reached me immediately, grabbing my shoulders. "Are you hurt?" she said, and I said no, but she checked anyway. Vale ran again. This time nobody chased immediately because I grabbed Vera's wrist and said, "Look at me." She did, and I said, "We stop him," and she answered yes. Then I said, "Then we talk," and her face tightened because she knew that conversation would be worse. Vale reached his carriage, but Sarka's cavalry blocked the road, and he was arrested alive. Vera hated that, but I appreciated Sarka more every year. The Peace Council resumed the next day. Vale's ledger destroyed half the War Council, 3 human generals resigned, 2 demon clan leaders were arrested, and trade houses collapsed. War suddenly became less profitable. Amazing how quickly ideology changes when invoices appear. Lucian proposed a joint investigative commission, and Vera agreed. Everyone clapped, but I did not because we still had another problem, her. That night I went to Vera's rooms, no guards inside. She stood by the lake window, and I placed copies of the city agreements on the table. "Explain," I said, and she turned and said, "You already understand." "I want to hear you say it," I said, and her expression became careful. "Every city I spared had something I wanted." "Me?" I asked, and she said yes. I asked about Roston, and she said they offered me stewardship. Galenport? I had considered moving there. Morel Valley? I once said the climate would suit me. I stared. That conversation happened at breakfast, I remember. I said, "Of course, how many military decisions involved me?" "Not all," she said, and I said, "That is not a number." She looked away and said, 23. I sat down. That was worse than expected. 23. She said some were minor, but I told her not to categorize the obsession. She went quiet, and I asked whether anyone died because she wanted me close. Her answer took time. "Not directly," she said. "Vera," I pressed, and she admitted that one border commander refused the clause. "He attacked us later." "That was not my question." I said, "We defeated him." She said, "How many?" 600. My stomach tightened. She stepped forward and said, "He attacked first." "I believe you," I said. Surprising her, "I am not blaming you for fighting a battle. I am asking whether you shaped the situation because of me." Her jaw tightened. "Yes." There it was, no excuse. "Good." I stood and said, "You cannot protect me by deciding everyone else's options. They use you, so do you." She flinched, and I continued, "Lucian wanted to sacrifice me for peace, and you wanted to imprison me for safety. You are both doing the same thing with different words." That landed. Lucian treated me as a resource worth sacrificing. Vera treated me as a resource worth preserving. Neither asked what I wanted, and I told her exactly that. She looked toward the lake and asked, "What do you want?" It was the first time she asked without already preparing an answer. "I want to return home," I said, and her eyes closed. "House Arkwright," she said, and I said yes. "With him?" she asked, and I said with my work. She said I could work in her palace, and I said that is not the point. "I know," she said quietly, "progress." I told her I would visit, and that surprised her. "Visit," she said, and I said if invited. "Yes," she said, and I said you might say no. "Yes," she said, looking deeply offended by the concept. I almost laughed, then did, and her expression became colder. "That is cruel," she said, and I said it is ordinary. She had no response. We returned to human territory after the council, and Vera did not stop me. That mattered. Her army escorted the road. Which was excessive, but I accepted it as compromise. House Arkwright looked smaller after the Night Palace, and Lucian and I returned to work for about 1 week. Then the royal court summoned him because King Aldrin had fallen ill, and the War Council wanted Lucian appointed emergency commander. Half the old council had been exposed by Vale, and the other half feared demons. Lucian became the obvious symbol. The novel was trying to restore its hero. I warned him, but he accepted anyway, not because prophecy demanded it, but because someone had to reorganize the army. Fair. Then the council asked me to attend, and I refused. Lucian supported me. Progress. The council sent another request, I refused again, and then they sent soldiers. That was less polite. Captain. Reinhold arrived with a royal warrant ordering me to the capital as a civilian strategic liaison. I read the paper. Strategic liaison? I said, and Reinhold looked embarrassed. You have unique influence over the Demon Queen, he said. There it was again, a resource. I handed the warrant back and said no, it is royal law, he said, and Lucian stepped beside me and said no. Reinhold looked at the hero and said, you cannot obstruct the crown, and Lucian answered, watch me. I appreciated him, but the standoff ended when black ravens landed on every roof. Vera's messengers, she had heard, of course. A note arrived. Cedric said no, that was the entire message. I laughed, and Reinhold did not. The king withdrew the warrant by evening, not because of principle, but because nobody wanted 30,000 demons asking whether no required translation. I wrote Vera a letter, thank you, and then another line, do not send an army next time. She replied, no promises, and I sent it back. She sent a second version, I will try better. The deeper crisis arrived 2 months later. Vale's network had not acted alone. Investigators found documents showing several priests from the Church of Radiant Dawn had funded the experiments. The church believed the original prophecy, hero kills Demon Queen destroys corrupt kingdoms, but only after enough bloodshed to awaken the divine gate. They wanted the war, Vale wanted profit, and the church wanted apocalypse, different incentives, same corpses. Lucian and I traveled to the capital archive, and Vera arrived without warning. I stared at her, and she held up a letter. You invited me, she said. I checked. I had written, we may need your knowledge of demon prophecy, and apparently that counted. Fair. We studied the original prophecy, not the public version but the oldest copy. It did not say the hero must kill the demon queen. It said, when the Sunblade and Night Crown meet beneath a divided sky, one must surrender what they claim or both peoples will burn. Claim, interesting word. Lucian claimed responsibility for everyone, Vera claimed control over what she loved, and the prophecy might not be about death at all. The church had interpreted surrender as sacrifice because institutions enjoy simple violence. But we found one more line hidden in damaged ink, the gate opens where choice is denied. That changed everything. The divine gate was not powered by war, it was powered by forced destiny, sacrifice, conquest, compulsion. The more both sides followed assigned roles, the stronger it became. The novel itself had been pushing the same structure, hero, demon queen, war, death, and my involvement had disrupted it, not because I was special, but because I kept making both of them choose differently. That realization made me uncomfortable. Lucian looked at me and said, you are smiling, and I said I am not. You are, he said. I have spent 12 years avoiding chapter 41, apparently, the real enemy was narrative pressure. Vera frowned. I do not know what that means, she said, and I said good. We needed to prevent the gate ritual. The church planned it during the Eclipse Festival, 7 days away. The ritual required both Lucian and Vera present. And the church would lure them with me again. I was becoming tired of being strategically kidnappable. We decided to use that, this time, my choice, important distinction. I volunteered as bait. Vera immediately said no, and Lucian also said no. I stared at both of them. Interesting, they finally agree on something and it is still deciding for me. Lucian closed his mouth, but Vera did not. It is dangerous, she said, and I said I know, you could die, she said, and I said yes, then no, she said. I looked at her, she hated what came next. I choose, I said, and her jaw tightened. Lucian looked away first, Vera took longer, and then she said, what is the plan? That might have been the most important sentence she had ever spoken. The church took the bait. 3 days later, I traveled with a deliberately small escort toward the Eclipse Shrine. Masked knights attacked, my guards surrendered on schedule, and I was captured. The church believed the plan worked. It did, just not theirs. They brought me beneath the ruined temple of Asterion, where High Priest Corvin stood beside a stone gate carved with sun and moon symbols. Lucian arrived through the western corridor, and Vera through the eastern, exactly as prophecy expected. Corvin smiled. History restores itself, he said, and I was chained to the center platform. Predictable. Lucian raised the sunblade. Vera's crown burned with black light, and the gate opened behind me, not fully. A crack, darkness beyond, whispers of thousands of voices saying the same roles, hero, queen, sacrifice, war. Corvin ordered Lucian to kill Vera, but Lucian refused. The gate widened anyway because refusal alone was not enough. Vera looked at me, and the chains around my wrists tightened magically. Corvin laughed. Choose him, queen, save one human, abandon your people, he said. There it was, her test. Old Vera would have destroyed the temple, killed everyone, and taken me, but new Vera looked toward her soldiers outside, then at the human prisoners chained along the walls. then at me she did not move. I shouted, "Do not rescue, only me," and her eyes closed briefly. Then she turned away. That terrified me. Good. She attacked the prison locks instead, and hundreds of chains shattered. Lucian moved too, not toward Corvin, but toward the trapped demon captives, cutting their restraints. The gate trembled. Corvin screamed at them to fight, but neither did. The prophecy demanded claims, but Vera released hers, and Lucian released his. The gate began closing, and Corvin panicked. He stabbed me, of course. Pain hit below my ribs, and Vera heard it. She turned, and for 1 second the old queen returned. Black fire exploded across the chamber, and Corvin smiled because he thought he had one. I grabbed Vera's wrist before she reached him, and she stopped. Blood ran down my coat, and her eyes were almost black. "Cedric," she said, and I said, "I am alive." "He hurt you," she said. "Yes." I said, "I will kill him." She said, "No." I said, "He deserves it." She said, "Probably." I said, and she stared. "Then why?" She asked. "Because he wants you to become the story," I said. That reached her. Lucian arrested Corvin alive, and Vera carried me out. I objected weakly, but she ignored me. Some boundaries become flexible when you have a stab wound. I woke 3 days later in a royal hospital, not the night palace, that mattered, and Vera sat beside the bed while Lucian slept in a chair near the window. Both looked terrible, and I felt smug. Then pain medication reminded me to stop moving. The gate had closed, the church fractured, and Corvin confessed after discovering prophecy had failed. Human and demon prisoners testified together, and the old war narrative collapsed under the weight of too many people refusing assigned roles. I survived chapter 41 twice. I considered that sufficient. Recovery took a month. Vera visited every day, and she knocked every day. Sometimes I was asleep, and she waited outside. That became my favorite sound: knocking, not gates opening, not armies arriving, a question. When I returned to House Arkwright, the black banners were gone. Vera's army remained beyond the southern ridge for 1 day, then withdrew. No demand, no moving crates, no palace furniture. Excellent. Lucian became commander of a joint border council instead of supreme human general. He hated meetings, and I found that healing. Sarka became Vera's chief diplomat. She hated diplomats, also healing. I resigned as Lucian's butler, and that shocked everyone, especially me. I had spent 12 years surviving through the identity the novel assigned: disposable butler, hero support, demon queen's weakness, and I wanted a job no prophecy cared about. I purchased a small estate near Velis using savings Lucian insisted were retroactive hazard compensation, and I turned it into a neutral rest house for traders crossing human and demon territories. Simple rooms, good food, no military meetings unless they paid triple. Vera visited 1 month after opening. She arrived with 6 guards, not 30,000. Progress. She stood at the front desk, and I looked up from the ledger. "Reservation?" I said, and her eyes narrowed. "You know who I am," she said, and I said, "Everyone reserves." She looked at Sarka, who looked delighted, and Vera took a slow breath. "1 room," she said. "How many nights?" I asked, and she stared. "I do not know," she said. "Then 3, I said. "Fine." I handed her a key, and she did not move. "What?" I said, and she asked, "Which room is yours?" "Not relevant," I said, and her expression darkened. I raised an eyebrow, and she stopped herself. "Good night, Cedric," she said. "Good night, Vera," I said, and she went upstairs. I smiled. Small victories. She came back the next morning and asked whether I would visit the Night Palace. I checked my calendar. "Next month," I said, and her face brightened then turned suspicious. "Why next month?" She asked. "I have work." I said. "I can move the work," she said, and I looked at her. She corrected herself. "I can wait," she said. "Better." I visited, and the palace had changed. My old room remained, same books, same desk, same coat I left behind. Vera watched me see it. "I kept it," she said. "That is obvious." I said. "I did not expect you to return." She said. "You still kept it?" I said. "Yes." She said. "Possessive but not controlling, different." I stayed 2 nights then left, and she let me. No locked gates, no guards blocking roads, no ravens following my carriage. Probably, I chose not to check too hard. Over the next year, human-demon relations improved enough that boring problems replaced existential ones: taxes, road maintenance, border permits, livestock disease. Civilization had survived. Unfortunately, bureaucracy had too. Vera became less feared, not safe, never safe, just predictable. Cities no longer signed Cedric clauses, and I made her revoke them personally. 23 documents. She complained after the 9th, but I made tea, and she finished all 23. Lucian attended one signing just to enjoy her misery, and she threatened to throw him through a window. I told her diplomatic buildings dislike that, and she did not. Progress. The strange thing was our relationship became easier after she stopped trying to secure it. We argued, shared meals, and exchanged letters without agents reporting whether I read them. I visited when invited, and sometimes I refused. The first time I refused because of work, she did not send an army. She sent soup, an unreasonable amount, enough for 15 people. Still progress. During that same year, a problem surfaced that neither side could solve with treaties. Mixed villages along the border had grown faster than the laws governing them, and every court argued over which kingdom controlled births, taxes, marriages, and inheritance. Vera wanted a single night court registry, human nobles wanted separate lists, and I wanted everyone to stop treating ordinary families like disputed cargo. A young demon carpenter named Oren and his human wife, Mira, arrived at my rest house after both governments refused to recognize their daughter. The child had red eyes, no horns, and a human grandmother who had already knitted 6 sweaters for her. Lucian sent lawyers, Vera sent a royal registrar, and they began arguing in my dining room before lunch. I charged both of them triple meeting fees, and that got their attention. We built the first joint civil registry at the rest house because neither capital trusted the other enough to host it. I expected paperwork, but instead the project became a parade of families whose lives had been quietly rearranged by the old conflict. A demon baker wanted to inherit his human stepfather's shop, a human widow wanted burial rights beside her demon husband, and 3 children had been born during evacuations and technically belonged to no province at all. Vera listened to every case. She was impatient, frightening, and unexpectedly good at identifying when a bureaucrat was using procedure to hide prejudice. Then one clerk suggested the easiest solution was to relocate mixed families into demon territory. Vera glanced at me, and I waited. Her jaw tightened, and then she said, "They decide where they live." I smiled before I could stop myself, and she noticed. For the rest of the afternoon, she looked annoyingly pleased. That registry changed more than any battled border town started requesting shared courts, traders stopped needing 3 sets of documents, and children entered schools without being classified as security risks. Lucian called it the most important reform of the decade. Vera said it was obvious, and I reminded her it had taken 6 months and 47 arguments. She said 38 of those arguments were caused by humans, and Lucian asked who caused the other 9. She refused to answer, but I had records. One autumn, Lucian asked me to accompany him on a diplomatic visit to Galenport. Years earlier, Vera had spared the city after its council barred House Arkwright's staff recruitment, and I almost declined out of spite. Then I went because I wanted to see what her old decisions looked like from inside the places affected by them. Galenport had prospered, its merchants loved demon trade, its mayor praised Vera publicly and feared her privately. At dinner, he pulled me aside and asked whether the Queen still considered me under protection. I told him she considered me under my own authority, and he did not understand. That answer bothered me for days. Vera had changed her behavior. But the world still remembered the version of her who made proximity to me a diplomatic category. Repairing that reputation required more than revoked clauses. When I returned, I told her she needed to visit Galenport without an army. She hated the suggestion immediately. Why? She asked. Because people need to see you enter a city without calculating what they must surrender to make you leave. I said, I do not care what they think. She said, you rule people who do. I said. She paced once across the room. 6 guards. She said 2. I said 4. She said 3. I said she stared. Fine. She said, diplomacy. The visit went well until a merchant offered me a position managing a New Harbor hotel. Vera stood beside me, and I felt her entire body go still. The merchant noticed too late and started apologizing. Vera raised one hand, and I waited. She asked me, do you want it? And I said no. Then she turned to the merchant and said. He said no, nothing else, no threats, no maps of underground tunnels, no clause in the trade treaty. The merchant survived dinner. I considered that historical progress. Later, Vera admitted she had imagined burning his warehouse. I told her thoughts were not crimes, and she looked relieved that conversation mattered because she had spent years believing dangerous feelings made dangerous actions inevitable. The novel treated her fury like destiny. The court treated it like proof she would always become the monster everyone feared. Learning that an impulse could remain an impulse seemed obvious to me, but to her it was revolutionary. She began telling me when jealousy hit before it turned into strategy. Sometimes the confession was ridiculous. The baker touched your sleeve. She said, he was brushing off flour. I said, I disliked it. She said, noted. I said, do not sound amused. She said, I am not making promises I cannot keep. She said and glared, then ate the pastry he gave us anyway. That counted as maturity. 2 years after the gate closed, Vera arrived at my rest house during winter with no guards, no crown, and snow in her hair. She looked exhausted enough that I let her inside without teasing the reservation policy. She sat near the fire, and for a while neither of us spoke. Then she said, I want to ask something selfish. I put down the ledger and said, ask. Move to the palace, she said, and I stared. Her mouth tightened. I said ask. She said true. I said why? I asked, because I still want you there. She said anything else? I asked. I sleep better when you are near. She said honest. I said anything else? I asked, she looked annoyed. I like breakfast with you, she said. I waited, and I hate not knowing when I will see you, she said. There it was, fear, not law, politics, or destiny, just fear. I leaned back and said, I am not moving, and pain crossed her face. She nodded. That was it, no negotiation, threats, or army. I continued, but I can spend part of winter there, and her eyes lifted. 2 weeks? She said 3, I said 2, she said 2.5, I said with a smile. Fine, she said, and she looked like she had won a war. Maybe she had, not against me, but against herself. We began dating that winter, not through ancient demon law, prophecy, or territorial claim, she asked, and I said yes. Lucian complained that he had survived dragons, cults, assassins, and a divine gate only to lose his butler to the demon queen. I reminded him I had resigned 2 years earlier, but he said emotionally it still counted. Vera told him to find his own butler, and he did. The new one quit after 3 months. I laughed for a week. Dating Vera did not make her suddenly ordinary. She still had an army, a crown, and the ability to make a room feel colder by entering it angry, but our conflicts changed shape. She stopped solving fear through command and started naming it before it became action. I stopped treating every protective gesture like an attempted kidnapping. We learned each other's rules without pretending either of us was easy. Vera's jealousy never disappeared. A merchant once complimented my cooking, and she broke a spoon. Not the merchant, the spoon improvement. I handed her another, and she glared. Do not encourage me, she said. I am supporting property-safe coping, I said, and she almost laughed. Another time, a noblewoman invited me to manage a coastal estate. Vera heard and visited my rest house. She knocked, sat down, and asked whether I wanted the job. I said no. She relaxed, then realized something. You would have said no without me. She said yes, I said, and she looked deeply offended by how unnecessary her interference had become. I found that adorable, but I did not tell her immediately. Eventually, the old shepherd's hut where I found her became part of a memorial road. Vera rebuilt the village nearby, not as a military monument, but as a refuge for displaced children from both sides. She asked me to manage it, and I said no. She looked surprised. I have my own work, I said, and she nodded, then hired someone qualified. That might have been her greatest political achievement. The refuge opened in spring. Narration, a former demon medic, became director. Human teachers worked beside demon healers. Children argued about food instead of species, and turnips remained unpopular. Vera banned them from one kitchen, and I told her that was authoritarian. She restored them to the menu, but nobody ate them. Democracy. The refuge became important for another reason. Some children had survived royal laboratories similar to the prison Vera once escaped, while others had lost parents to demon retaliations she ordered early in her reign. One boy named Hale refused to speak whenever she visited. He was human, 11, and had watched demons burn his father's guard post. Vera tried bringing gifts, but he would not touch them. She asked me what to do. Nothing, I said. He hates me, she said. He is allowed. I said, I am trying to help, she said. He is still allowed, I said, and that answer hurt her. She returned to the refuge anyway, not to win him over, but to attend budget meetings and leave him alone. Months passed, and one rainy afternoon, Hale asked her to repair a broken roof tile because she was the tallest person nearby. Vera climbed the ladder herself. He did not forgive her that day, but he simply stopped leaving the room when she entered. She told me about it later as if reporting a military victory, and I told her it was better because she had not forced it. She understood. 5 years after the army surrounded my estate, I found the original demand letter inside an old box. Cedric Astor will move into Her Majesty's palace before sunset. I brought it to Vera. She read it, then covered her face. I was younger, she said. You were 24. I said younger. She said, you brought wardrobes. I said, I thought you would need clothes. She said, you brought my own wardrobe. I said, I had measurements. She said, that is not helping. I said. She took the letter from me. Burn it, she said. No, I said. Her eyes narrowed. I am framing it, I said. Is Cedric, she said. For educational purposes, I said. And she chased me through the palace library. No black fire, mostly. The final remains of the Divine Gate were sealed beneath Asterion. Lucian visited once a year, and Vera never did. I went with her once anyway. The stone arch was cracked and silent. The old carvings still showed hero and queen facing each other with weapons raised. But someone had added a smaller figure between them, a man holding a ledger. I stared. Who did that? I said, and Lucian looked innocent while Vera looked pleased. I hated both of them. The inscription beneath had been changed, not prophecy, history. They chose otherwise. I read it twice. That was better, not because we escaped destiny completely. People never do. We still had history, fear, duty, power, and bad habits, but none of those deserved final authority. Lucian learned that saving everyone does not give him permission to sacrifice anyone. Vera learned that protecting someone does not give her ownership of their future, and I learned that being just the butler had become an excuse to avoid choosing a life for myself. We all had problems, at least they were ours. Years later, the Joint Border Council invited me to speak about the early peace negotiations. I refused the first 3 invitations because I did not want to become a professional symbol. Lucian finally sent a personal note asking me to come because younger officers had begun romanticizing the Harrow Pass crisis that annoyed me enough to accept. The hall was full of cadets, diplomats, demon officers, and students who had never lived through the war scare. They expected dramatic stories about prophecy, sword fights, or the Demon Queen's army. I gave them paperwork. I showed the Vale insurance claims, the 23 Cedric clauses, the royal bait proposal, and the first joint civil registry. Then I explained that most disasters begin long before anyone draws a sword. They begin when people become categories instead of people: hero, monster, asset, bait, mate, butler. Vera sat in the back row, and when the lecture ended, one student asked whether I believed the Demon Queen had truly changed. I looked at her, she raised one eyebrow, and I answered, "She changes every time she accepts an answer she does not like." The room laughed nervously, but Vera did not. Later, outside, she said, "That was insulting." It was accurate, I said. "You could have said I became kinder." She said, "You are not especially kind," I said. And she stared. "You became safer to disagree with," I said. And that stopped her. She looked away, then said, "That is better." It was, I said. Last month, Vera visited my rest house again. She still uses room 7. She claims the window has the best view, but I know it is because room 7 is closest to mine. I allow the lie. She came downstairs while I was preparing breakfast, no crown or armor, hair loose around her shoulders. She leaned against the kitchen door and said, "Cedric." "Yes?" I said, "I have a question," she said. And I looked at her. She hesitated. "That still happens sometimes. Would you come home with me tonight? Not move, not stay forever, not belong, come home." "I checked the bookings. Tomorrow," I said, and she frowned. "I asked tonight." She said, "I heard. Why tomorrow?" I said, "Merchant conference," she said, and she hated merchant conferences more than turnips. Her face said so. Then she nodded. "Tomorrow." No army appeared, no roads closed, no city signed away my employment. She simply waited. The next evening, I locked the rest house, handed the keys to my assistant, and joined her carriage because I chose to. Vera looked out the window for the first 10 minutes pretending not to smile. I let her. Some victories deserve privacy.